Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, more stupid answers to sensible questions. It's Ask CriminOlly. So I've got 4 questions to go through today. As always, if you'd like to ask your own question, you can either put it in a comment on one of my videos with Ask CriminOlly at the start, or email me at criminolly@gmail.com. I do have quite a big back catalogue of questions to get through, so if I don't get to your question in today's video, I promise I will at some point. I've got all of them. Maybe I'll do an extra video one week just to try and get through them. But yeah, I'll try to keep it to about 4 questions per video, because otherwise I think the videos are just too long. I like to try and keep my videos reasonably succinct, although my TBRs and wrap-ups tend to go on a bit, don't they? Okay, first question is from Lewis Carty. So Lewis is a long-time subscriber, so hello Lewis. So Lewis's question is, what do you think about differences between British horror novels and American horror novels, and the way that American writers like Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Richard Lehman write their novels compared to British writers like James Herbert, Sean Hudson and Graham Masterton? So I think this is a really interesting question, and I think there is a difference. So I think when you think particularly about those 3 British authors that Lewis has mentioned, I think, and I think this is generally true in British horror, that British horror tends to be more about set pieces. So James Herbert in particular was an absolute master of set pieces, but Sean Hudson does set pieces really well too, and so does Graham Masterton. So I read one of Graham Masterton's quite recent horror novels fairly early on in the life of the channel. I can't remember if I did a review of it or not, but I definitely read it. And that had some fantastic set pieces in it. And I think that American horror novelists tend to be more about plot than about set pieces. So I think typically in British horror novels, the plot is there to get you from one set piece to the next. Whereas in American horror novels, the set pieces, and they still have set pieces, but the set pieces are there to kind of bump up the plot a bit and bump up the impact, rather than them being, the real reason for the book. I also think that American authors tend to be a bit more wholesome, shall we say, in terms of having likeable characters and giving those characters happy resolutions. I think that's something that tends to happen more in American horror than in British horror. That's not to say that either British or American don't do the other, if that makes sense. But I think the tendency is more in American horror to have a happy ending. And I'm also conscious of something my son mentioned to me the other day, and I'm not sure where he read it, but it was about the difference between American sitcoms and British sitcoms on TV. And he said he'd read the difference between American sitcoms and British sitcoms is that American sitcoms, everything goes back to normal at the end. Whereas in British sitcoms, everything goes to shit at the end. So, British sitcoms often end in scenes of complete chaos, but maybe not quite so much nowadays, but certainly back in the 70s and 80s. That was very true. And then the next episode starts and it's as if nothing happened, and nothing has happened. Whereas American sitcoms are much more about re-establishing the status quo, should we say, at the end of the episode. And I think that's true to quite a large extent with American horror novels as well. So American, horror fiction is often about some disruptive force, be it, an evil, a monster or a killer or whatever, coming into a community. And I think there's more of a tendency in American horror novels for that, the equilibrium to be restored at the end of the book than there is in British horror novels, which are happier to have like a twist ending or an unhappy ending or whatever. So it's a bit of a rambly answer, but hopefully that answered your question, Lewis. And do let me know in the comments, everybody, what you think on this topic. I think it's quite an interesting subject. Okay, next question is from Leslie Pell McCarthy. who says, "Hi, I'm a new subscriber, and sorry, Leslie, you may have been a new subscriber when you wrote this comment, but you aren't anymore. If indeed you are still a subscriber after I've taken so long to get to this question. I'm a new subscriber and I love listening to you while I work. Thank you. Have you ever read and reviewed Helter Skelter by Vincent Bugliosi or Fatal Vision by Joe McGinnis? These are two of my favourite true crime books, but they are old and some people, brackets young'uns, haven't heard of them. I haven't heard of Fatal Vision, but I have read Helter Skelter. I read it not that long ago, probably after I started the channel or just before I started the channel, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really interesting take. So if you don't know, so Helter Skelter is a book about about Charles Manson and the Manson family and the murders of Sharon Tate and other people, but written by or co-written by Vincent Bugliosi. He was one of the prosecutors in the Charles Manson trial. So he really does have an insight into what went on and all the evidence that was presented and things like that. And it's a really, really detailed and interesting book, but also very readable. So clearly the Manson murders were absolutely horrific, but I think Manson is one of those figures who, even today continues to fascinate in popular culture. So, it was only a few years ago that Tarantino, talked about Manson in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So he's definitely still a figure that people are interested in. And yeah, Helter Skelter is an excellent true crime book. I've not read a huge amount of true crime, but Helter Skelter is definitely one that I would recommend if it's a genre that you're interested in. Okay, next question is from Troy Treadup, who says, this question was inspired by a recent Michael K. Vaughan video. And it's probably going to sound a bit judgy, but I swear I don't mean it that way. Okay, Troy, we believe you. Do you ever find yourself sort of annoyed, for lack of a better word, by all the reading you've committed to do because of Booktube, and then in brackets events, buddy reads, etc., rather than just being able to pick up a random book whenever you want? So I talked about this a little bit in my September TBR video. And the answer to the question is yes, but it's worth it, I think. So I do, in my September TBR video, if you've watched it, I've really stacked my reading up in September, and I've got a lot of books that I need to read, and so I think I've got 24, 25 books, something like that, and all but I think 3 of them are either for Booktube events or for buddy reads. So definitely Booktube is heavily steering my reading. But I don't mind that because I'm really enjoying being part of the community, and what I'm typically managing to do is to still read books that I want to read rather than reading books just because they fit an event. And there are events I'm not taking part in. I am taking part in 3 events in September, but there are definitely events that I'm not doing that I could be. So Shorty September, which is the event that's making up most of my, my TBR for the month, is a fantastic event because the only criteria for the books is they have to be short, so they have to be below 250 odd pages. So actually that leaves you a wealth of choice, and I'm able to read across a wide variety of genres and types of book within September and still stick with the Shorty September prompts. So yes, so my answer is yes, it does constrain me a bit, but I don't mind because I think it's worth it for the community aspect of Booktube, and it hasn't yet constrained me to an extent that I've found too constraining, if that makes sense. I'm still very much enjoying the whole Booktube experience, reading events and all. That said, at the moment, I'm going to try and do less reading events in the final quarter of the year. So there is one that I think I'm going to do in, I can't remember if it's in October or November. There's one coming up that's kind of alternative history and things like that, which I'm going to try and do. But apart from that, and unless we'll see what catches my eye, but I'm going to try and either ramp down on the number of events I do, or still do them but only read 1 or 2 books. Okay, and the final question then is from Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. And I think this is the best question I've ever had on Ask CriminOlly. So thank you, Greg, for this wonderful question. And please do answer this question in the comments as well, anybody out there who has an opinion. So Greg's question is, if you could go back in time and peacefully convince an author to pursue a non-writing career before any books were published, who would that be? And I immediately knew who I was going to answer for this question. And you may be able to guess, because it is an author I have touched on, not maybe that much on the channel, but I have mentioned on the channel before as an author who I do not like, and that is James Patterson. So I read, and to be fair, quite enjoyed the first few Alex Cross books when they came out. So along with Along Came a Spider, Kiss the Girls, things like that. You know, they were okay psychological thrillers. You know, I quite enjoyed them. They were quite readable. I think what James Patterson has done with his career since then is kind of actively damaging to publishing and reading. So his model now is that he is much more a brand than he is an author. And if you don't know, and I'm sure you do, but if you don't know, so he co-authors books with either newer, less experienced writers who effectively, I think, write the book from a brief synopsis that James Patterson gives them, or with celebrities whose name on the cover of a book, presumably boosts sales. So the most recent one of those, I think, was with Dolly Parton, but he's also done books with Bill Clinton and people like that. And whilst I am clearly a huge fan of like mass-produced, quickly written fiction, I do think that Patterson's particular model of just trying to dominate the shelves with books with his name on it, and frankly, from the ones I've read, books that are not very good at all, I do think that's damaging, and I think it stifles other forms of, other types of book coming out, other forms of creativity. It literally just takes up space on the shelves of bookshops that could be filled by books by other better, more interesting writers. So yeah, I think James Patterson is not just a writer I don't like, but actually a negative influence on reading for all of us, whether we read his books or not. So yes, an amusing question, and maybe a slightly too serious, impassioned answer. But so as always, thanks very much for watching. Thank you to everyone who has asked questions. I will get through all of them eventually, I promise. And as I said at the start, if you'd like to ask a question, then either leave a comment with Ask CriminOlly at the start, or send me send me an email at criminolly@gmail.com. As always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well. Hope you read really good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.